Okay, so last time I talked about unions and how they undermine employment and undermine prosperity because they tend to get so greedy and so far above the market value for the labor that their product is no longer competitive and requires subsidies, which draws money from other sectors of the economy and thus cause unemployment. That can get to be a very involved topic, and so that is just a huge frustration when people don't understand that unions can undermine prosperity in that way. And person wants to look it up, they can look up the effect of the coal unions in the United Kingdom, and more recently the unions for Hostess. The entire company went bankrupt because Hostess just couldn't afford the pay scale the unions were demanding. They warned the unions that the company would have to close if they insisted on it. I said unions plural. Hostess had 115 of them. Can you imagine if you owned a business and you had to deal with 115 different unions? Anyway, I don't really want to talk about unions right now. Although I would have a lot to say about them, but I want to focus on the trustworthiness of government. There is this dangerous idea that has taken hold that people think they can trust government and that they can't trust businesses, so therefore we have to have a more powerful government to keep things honest, to put it simply. And the problem is that a government can force money out of your pocket. They do that all the time in the form of taxes. A business cannot do that. And and people also say that they trust government because they're elected and therefore they are responsive because they have to have votes. And the problem is that people in government are greedy for power, and they often get to where they are not responsive to people. That's the very idea behind a limited government. It's the very idea behind the U.S. Constitution, which limits the power of government, because a government that's gaining power is dangerous. And business does not have power in that way. A business must compete. They must offer a fair value in order to stay in business. And so the thinking is really 180 degrees out of phase. They accuse business of what government is susceptible to. Speaking of not being able to trust government, I just ran across an article about California's water problems. Governor Brown's like the 2-for-1 deal you see on the commercials, except it's a 2-for-1 deal you just don't want to take. This guy here is being the typical top-down leftist, not even willing to listen to what people have to say, his constituents, the people he's supposed to represent. Now, this drought could have been prevented, or at the very least alleviated, but they have sent so much water out to sea that we, for the first time in California's history, having to live under mandatory water restrictions. And like I said, it's really unnecessary. And now the government's trying to scramble around and figure out what to do, and it's just the usual disaster when government's trying to figure out what to do about a problem they caused. So, and one particularly ridiculous aspect of how they're trying to solve this problem that the the nonsensical way that they're going about having us conserve water. Some communities have to conserve 25%, other communities 35%. The the cutoff between the two percentage is for the savings target is set at 165 gallons per day per person. Now, the so if you're just under the 165, you only have to save about 40 gallons a day. If you're just over the 165, you have to save 53 gallons or so a day. So the basically it's identical usage, but one community that is just barely under that 165 gallons, they're allowed more usage per day. And there are two neighboring communities, in fact, that are just over and just under that limit. And yet one is allowed more usage per day. And then some communities use 300 gallons per day per person, and they still get to use 200 gallons a day, where the community is hovering around 165 gallons per day of usage. They are restricted to about 100 gallons or less. So some communities under this percentage cut on water usage are legally allowed to use twice what other communities are using per person, simply because they used more before these restrictions went in place. If water is really in this short of supply, everyone needs to be held to a specific gallon per person per day usage rather than this percentage cut. It should just be flat across the board. And is this part of what Governor Brown was talking about when it took 1,000,000 hours, and who knows how much that cost, when it took 1,000,000 hours for his staffers to study how to work our way through this problem? Is this the kind of nonsense that comes out of that much public money spent on looking at this? Who knows how much those staffers make? Who knows how much this cost? So, just in the course of being questioned about the validity of his plan, Governor Brown said, "Until you put 1,000,000 hours into it, shut up." Now, Governor Brown's spokesman said that the remark was a joke. It didn't really sound like a joke. And you consider the arrogance of leftists that they know best, despite the foolishness of leftist policies. And I don't think it was a joke. It's like I said, it's just a typical leftist arrogance. And we've let so much water that was stored just go out to sea that we'd have, and this environmental use of it when people need it is short-sighted, especially in times where snowfall is less than normal. Now, we are out of water, and these mandatory restrictions are being put into place, but we're still sending water out to sea. We're still letting water out of reservoirs for these delta smelt, which they found very few of. And yet they're still trying to protect them. the stuff they were trying to do to protect them in the first place has not worked. That's why they're dead. That's why the survey in the Delta has found so few of them. And really, an untold story, or undertold anyway, is that the reason so many fish in the Delta are dying is because the communities on the Delta have not upgraded their sewage treatment plants, so they're releasing water that isn't fully treated into the Delta, and that is killing the smelt. Now, the environmentalists say, oh, it's the pumps, it's the pumps, it's the pumps, the pumps that are used to provide irrigation water for agriculture. But that's actually several places down on the list. And one of the primary causes is undertreated sewage being dumped into the Delta. So the first thing that should be done is requiring these communities on the Delta to expand their sewage treatment plants to keep up with their growing population. That would fix the problem rather than the current action of just putting a Band-Aid on it. Another case where government has told out and out lies. Government cannot be trusted. The very idea that you can trust government, even on the simple things, one doesn't have to get too involved in the details to even understand this or see this. Government always lies. Obamacare was a lie. The very premise behind it was a lie. The MIT economist named Gruber, he admitted he lied to get this bill passed. And he also stated explicitly that he thought he was justified in lying because of his perceived stupidity of the American people. And, I mean, just take a simple example. Government never cuts spending. And when they say they're cutting spending, they still are increasing spending. You know, for an example, if there's a government department that has a $1.5 billion annual budget, and they ask for an increase to $1.7 billion, but they only get $1.6 billion, they're spending $100 million more a year, and they'll report that as $100 million cut in spending because they did not get the amount of increase they wanted. And if even on a simple thing like that, you can't even trust government, why is it that you'd assume you can trust them on anything else? Government just lies. They're greedy for our money, they're greedy for power, and they're never satisfied. They always want more money, no matter how much is being spent. In fact, the first quarter of this year, the U.S. federal government collected a record amount in revenue. In the first quarter of 2015, and they still ran a deficit. There's just simple facts like that show that the government, they're never responsible with what they spend, and they never tell the truth. Yet we are still so gullible when the government wants more money. They don't even spend what they have wisely. They say we need it to run the government, but our roads are falling apart, our bridges are falling apart. We spent all these trillions in deficit spending, and still our infrastructure is falling apart. Where does all this money go? And how do they think that they can be trusted with more? And why do so many Americans still trust the government when they ask for more? The truth of the matter is that they are not really running the government with this money. The fact is, they are not really running the government with this money as they claim anyway. They aren't even living up to the responsibilities that a government is supposed to. They're using it for social engineering, for pushing products onto the market through subsidies that there is no market for, and for people that aren't even pulling their own weight. That's not running the government. That's dead weight. That's a waste. And we're going into debt for it. And future generations that have no choice in the matter are being put into debt over this. We have more debt than we can pay off in a generation. And that isn't